Model horse drastic customizing is one of my favorite things in this hobby, and I'll show you how I did it in this detailed video. Also, all the tools and supplies I'll mention are linked below. Enter the proud Arabian mare, or also known in the model horse hobby as Pam. One of Breyer's older models, this copy is almost 46 years old. I want to preserve a lot of her old charm, but I also want to give her a more modern conformation by slimming her down, straightening her legs, and giving her a fresh look with new hair. She will look very different, but if people respond, "Wait, is that a Pam?" I feel I will have succeeded. Her face is my favorite part. Since I want to make sure I lengthen her a bit, I'm drawing out her current stance to refer to later. I'm also referencing a Photoshop manipulation I put together as part of a worksheet I made last year. Permanent markers help me guide where I want to cut. It's incredibly important to put on a snugly fitting particulate mask and goggles to protect me from plastic dust and little chunks that might strike my eyes. Safety first, art second. I prefer to drill a little bit at a time, taking my time. Oof, here is why we wear a mask. Thick areas of plastic such as the tail base is a job for the handsaw. 2 days and 3 hours later I was ready to reassemble. This is a dry fit to see how things are coming together before I glue anything and to make sure that I indeed slimmed her down as much as I wanted. My lovely friend, the Humble Masking Tape, helps temporarily hold everything together. Next up is a session with a heat gun. This will also require a bowl of cold water for setting the plastic and barbecue gloves for heat protection. I wanted to straighten out this mare's knock knees and splayed hooves, so I'll use heat to bend them straight. I find it's important to go slow with this tool to make sure I don't accidentally burn my model. Going slow helps ensure even distribution of heat throughout the legs and gives me time to test how fast it's softening. Here I'm holding my heat gun no closer than a few inches and I'm only using the lowest setting. Once the plastic is soft, I slowly bend the model into shape. It's best to do this in small increments rather than one big move all at once. Ooh, there we go, that's looking better. Happy now, I dunk it into the cold water for a little bit to help it set in its new position. Second dry fit. Now I glue the parts together using cyanoacrylate glue and baking soda as an activator. As you can see, some seams are just too wide to add glue right now, so I'll use tape for a bit longer to help. Those wide seams I'll fill with epoxy. It's important to let that sit, so I cut 2 wooden dowels while I wait. One is wide enough to fit between her shoulders and the other between her haunches. Grabbing 14 gauge galvanized steel wire, I wrap strands of wire around each rod, making sure to leave plenty of extra length. The galvanized steel is tough, so I use pliers to help bend it, and I take my time. Stuffing foil around the rod helps hold it up while I wait for the glue to set. The second rod was easier, perhaps because I had more room to reach inside. I sprinkle baking soda into the glued areas of both to help strengthen those areas and set them faster. I let this sit overnight before moving on to the next step, just to ensure everything had plenty of time to cure. I also use this convenient pause to tidy up my workspace. This makes it easier for me to keep the model clean as I work, because otherwise I'm a messy person during creativity. Next is to make a reinforcement for the core. There are lots of different ways to do this, but here I am cutting 3 sections of wooden dowel fixed together with wire. I find dry fitting a quick and easy method to make sure everything is proportionate while it's still easy to make adjustments. Time to fill the body cavity with more aluminum foil. I also used it to simulate where I needed to add putty to adjust her hoof heights. This made it easier to adjust her overall posture without needing to use clay yet. Once I'm happy with that, I add in more CA glue and baking soda. I don't glue all the gaps just yet, but I glue enough to help secure everything in place without needing all that tape. She's definitely skinnier now. Since I'm going to add a bit of epoxy putty to her midsection to sculpt back in that gap, I wanted to make sure she stays skinny, so I need to squish in some of the plastic. With the heat gun, I slowly work on squishing the ends of the plastic into the foil. Because that foil reflects heat, it's even more important I wear those thick barbecue gloves. I didn't want to dunk her into a bowl of cold water and get water in all of that foil, because now it would take her interiors forever to dry. Instead, I wrapped an icy cold cloth around her and stuck her in my refrigerator for a bit to set the plastic. The heat gun is a bit of an intermediate to advanced skill set, and you can see that even I warped her plastic a little too much. Dremel to the rescue. I used the sanding barrel bit to knock back that rippled plastic. I'll finish correcting with epoxy later. While I was at it, I also carved down the girth section and roughed up the plastic to ensure that my epoxy putty will have plenty of tooth to grip. Okay, back to that neck. The general rule of thumb is that they are approximately the same length as the head. This varies of course by breed, age, and gender, but it's a good start. I use a marker to measure this out on my wire. I also measure again to make sure I have enough wire for inside the head itself. Sorry it's a little off camera. I always wear my safety goggles when cutting wire. Large areas that I plan to resculpt, such as necks, need sturdy support for all of my new epoxy putty, which is why I love using galvanized steel. True, it's hard to bend, but pliers make short work of that, and the reason it's hard to bend with my fingers is also the reason it's sturdy for drastic customizing. I take my time adjusting the wire to get the neck and head pose I want. Sometimes this takes me several attempts to get it right. I check that the neck is looking good with a paper mock-up, which then I use as a guide for a tape armature. As I was trying to level out her hooves, I noticed that part of the problem was a cannon bone that was a little too short. Having a pair of calipers and marking joints can be an effective way to compare proportions, and yep, sure enough, that leg was about 1/8 of an inch too short. Back to the drill. I did switch drills midway through this project, so what you're seeing now is a flex shaft drill instead of the handheld rotary drill. Either will work for drastic customizing. When I'm drilling for a wire insert, I make sure to drill deep enough to add plenty of wire. This strengthens the leg. I drop in cyanoacrylate glue and insert the wire into the first piece of the leg. Baking soda again to help it cure. Then I check to see just how much length I need to insert into the other part of the leg and make my cut. After gluing and before adding baking soda, I make sure I'm truly happy with the final placement as viewed from all angles. It takes me a few tries to get it right. For a smoother transition between plastic and the epoxy putty I'll add soon, I like to whiten the scap. I learned the hard way that straight cuts can sometimes leave lines that show up later in the finished work, but angled cuts result in more blended epoxy putty application. Ready for epoxy now. I use 2-part epoxy putties because they cure through a chemical process and do not require baking. Milliput, Aves, and Magic Sculpt are some examples. I mix equal parts of resin putty and hardener thoroughly for 6 minutes to avoid epoxy cracking or lifting in the future. Then I apply small amounts to the model. Water or isopropyl alcohol helps smooth the putty, which is especially helpful since I'm wearing gloves for the sculpting process. For her midsection, I make sure to really stuff the epoxy inside the cavity and under the plastic so that when done, I have layers of epoxy gripping the plastic from both inside and outside. I'm intentionally leaving the first layer rough to make it easier to apply the following layers of epoxy putty. I double check my proportions and let that sit overnight. As long as I'm using well-fitting nitrile gloves without much texture on them, it is actually possible to sculpt smooth additions. There is a slight learning curve compared to sculpting with bare hands, but since two-part epoxies can cause allergic reactions in some people, I make sure to wear mine now. Water will help, and if needed, I find smoothing with a dampened lint-free shop towel gets the putty even smoother than with bare hands. I use some scraps of mat board to help fix her neck into place, with more of the glue and baking soda combo. Then I added generous amounts of glue to fix the head into the wire. I'm using masking tape to temporarily hold her secure as the glue set. Stuffing epoxy putty inside her head and onto her neck helps further ensure a secure hold. The tape armature is really just a temporary structure to make it much easier to apply the first few parts of epoxy putty. These following layers of epoxy are the real armature, as they give the rigid strength needed for the muscle sculpting. I make sure these layers are full of texture to give the muscle layers plenty to grip. Now, necks are tricky. It's totally normal if you have to redo them. In my case, mine was too short and I did have to rebuild the base. I wanted to show a few clips to illustrate that it is normal for art to be a messy back and forth process. That's better. Alright, now that I'm back on track, let's start adding muscle sculpting. I sculpt necks from a series of noodle shapes and triangular shapes. Each represent different muscle groups, and while that looks different for every horse, the main groups stay the same, so the process is the same. On paper, it's as simple as that. In practice, it's, well, practice. Lots and lots of practice. I'm hoping to create a tutorial someday that clarifies how I sculpt these muscle groups, but for now, here's the process as demonstrated on my pen. And just as before, I often have to add or subtract to this until I'm happy with it. I finished my neck using the detailing method I highlighted in my tutorial on how to sculpt wrinkles, which is on my channel. Next is her lovely face. The ears I featured in a separate tutorial, so if you want to see how I made those, check out that video. Her offside nostril was smaller, so I drilled that off and sculpted a new one that matches in size. Sharpie markers help me keep track of what details I want to add. A little scuffing again to make sure everything sticks properly. And then a series of those noodles along with circles and blobs. My clay shaper tools are especially helpful to blend these shapes and reshape them. Water is used to further help with blending and smoothing. After cure time, a quick spritz of primer helps me see what is unified and what still needs work. Much as with the ears, I have a tutorial sculpting the mane already on my channel, so here are all the key steps in a much more condensed, faster pace. Go check out that video for all the tips for why I'm doing what I'm doing. What I didn't feature in its own tutorial was the tail, and let me tell you, that's because the tail was tricky. At first, I built a really cool armature. Then I realized I might not be able to paint underneath of it or paint or croup. It kind of hurt my soul, but I ripped that off and created a new design that wouldn't cause as many painting challenges. I had already completed some of her prepping and priming as I resculpted her. During the drilling stage, I knocked back her rough seams and other imperfections. I sanded her all over and spritzed her with primer to see what needed more work. So really all that was needed after completing her sculpting was some final rounds of all over sanding and a few layers of primer. Also important to note is that I bathed my models before each primer layer to remove epoxy dust, finger oils, and anything else that might cause the primer and paint layers to lift. Both the sanding and the primer help smooth what needs to be smooth, unify her surfaces, and most importantly, give excellent toothful layers of paint, which by the way, I will be featuring in a second step-by-step video. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it, and thank you for watching. And a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed, commented, liked, and shared my videos. I appreciate that so much.